Call us to order. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. We are all here. We do have we don't have a lot of agenda items, but we have a couple of pretty meaty agenda items. So I'm not going to give a huge voiceover. I'm going to actually turn it over pretty immediately. I think we're starting with Darren. Is that right? Or Caitlin? Wait a minute. So what we do have, and I'll be better about putting the agenda in the chat. I sent an email out to the committee earlier this week. We have the following things. We're going to cover, Caitlin has updated the fall engagement session slides and is ready for just some comment from us. And we're going to talk about next steps, but she's updated them to make them, on the road size. Darren has been in conversation with the Office of Racial Equity. We've gotten some really great feedback from them as far as the metrics and just how we're engaging in this. So he's going to give a voiceover on that. We're going to talk about what it looks like for the survey launch. And then we're going to talk about, and then we have a outstanding agenda item, and you may have seen this in your other committee meetings, the option to continue virtual. I'm not going to give you a spoiler alert on what my preference is, but to continue virtual meetings for the committee, or if we want to entertain some in-person engagement. So thank you, Darren, for putting the agenda in the chat. Is there anything, I guess, before we dive all the way in, that is missing from the agenda? All right, I'm going to take the silence as consent in this case, and I will turn it over to Caitlin.
Okay, so first I'm gonna, jump on. I'm gonna need screen sharing access. Give me that, and we'll do that shortly. I'm gonna give an overview of the considerations I put into this draft roadshow package. Then I'll go through what I have so far in terms of format. And then we can do feedback, and then I will take your feedback and implement it into what I have so far. So the considerations that I had were that this should fit within 15 to 30 minutes, which is pretty quick. So whereas the fall engagement sessions were formatted more of a focus group where there were lots of open-ended questions, this version will instead make use of an in-meeting poll, and then maybe some time for one or two open-ended questions. Yeah, so it will, I think my preference is maybe there'll be some Likert scale kind of questions, and then maybe some multiple choice, select all kind of questions. Also, when Darren, Ebony Rose, and I met, I think 2 weeks ago, Ebony Rose had floated the idea of having 2 committee members present per presentation. So one member would facilitate and the other one would assist with note taking and just observing vibes generally in the room. And also I just wanted to keep in mind the balance between being informational while information gathering, especially with just how short of a time frame that we have. So again, similar to the fall engagement sessions, I didn't want to front load the participants with everything there is to know about the education governance structure. And I also don't want to put ideas in people's heads before we present information. So I want to have a true how they actually feel without.
And I don't know also, if anyone else is having trouble, but you were breaking up for me. I know there's a storm because
okay.
Yeah, it broke up for me too.
Okay.
No. Okay.
But you sound pretty clear now.
Better now.
Okay.
Now.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry. Okay. So yeah, I don't want to front load the presentation with too much information, too much background information. And still, we want to make sure that people are, to the best of our ability, put on equal footing so that people who are not as fluent in our structure can still participate comfortably with people who probably do know a lot more about our structure. So, okay, with all that said, I'm going to share my screen.
This is a page that we
Allegedly going to share 2 screens. Please let me know if you see 2 screens.
or to CBS.
Okay, awesome. Moving my image so I don't have to look at myself. Okay. Okay, so basically you'll go through the agenda, which includes the background on the board governance committee. Then it'll move into the feedback and discussion portion, and then you'll do next steps. So that full slide, we can edit the language. Yeah, it says my internet connection is unstable. I'm going to turn off my video and see if that helps. Stop video. Does this help? Okay, so yeah, so you can say like we're researching how the District of Columbia's mayoral control education system compares to other localities, as well as serving public opinions and experiences with the current education system. And then we plan to issue a set of recommendations to the full state board and then share it with council at the end of our research. Then you can move into the timeline. You can describe the types of information gathering that you've done so far, including like meeting with Dr. Heather Harding, the AU students, literature review, and the fall engagement sessions. And you can just, I'll put the time frame down here. I forgot to do that, but we'll do that. So I did want to include this slide or a portion of the beginning for the facilitator to set expectations on how the committee plans to engage people, especially since this is so short. And I think that if we don't make it clear, people will be like, well, that was just pretty garbage and too fast, and I didn't get to share what I wanted to share. So I think that you should emphasize that this is just one of many opportunities. This is an entryway for deeper engagement, especially since you only have 15 to 30 minutes of time. And whether, however the committee decides it will format the rest of its engagement, you can maybe make a note of that, like we'll do a survey, multiple engagement sessions. I don't know if you'll do like a focus group or something like that. And I know that Darren will get into this later, but if we decide what the engagement goals are going to be, this would be a good time to include it. So yeah, and then we'll move on to the poll. And this is where I would like committee members to help me come up with questions, because I don't think they should all come from me. And so I came up with a sample of questions, just a quick 4 to start off with, because we don't want the survey to be super long. I'm hoping that the poll will take people 5 minutes or so to complete, and then you'll have 10 to 15 minutes of like open-ended discussion. So some questions could include, how well do you feel?
I'm sorry, Caitlin, can I just ask a question? Because I'm lost. So we have people at this session, and then we do the introduction, and then we're gonna give them a survey while we're all there, and they're gonna work on it while we're there?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's for the 15 minutes?
Basically. So, well, the poll should take quicker. I hope that they'll
Oh, I see.
take not too much time. Do you know what I mean?
It's one of the Zoom polls. So I can't give some background on what we asked. So when we did the fall engagement sessions, we had to figure out how to make it shorter and fit into a 9-hour time frame. So we thought maybe it might we made the suggestion to turn some of the questions into Zoom polls. So like I don't know if we've all been through a bunch of virtual types of convenings at this point. So essentially we would use the function where literally people could you do a quick poll on the screen. And so one question might be, how well do you feel the education system?
That's fine. No, that's all I didn't understand was, so I know we can go on. Thanks.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, especially because I think my understanding was that you would like board members would be presenting at ANC meetings or like other organizations. It could be PAVE, Empower Ed. I mean, I'm not really sure what stakeholder groups you will be engaging with, like which agendas you'll be on. But my assumption is that if you're going to another organization's meeting, you'll probably only have 15 to 30 minutes of time allotted. So that's why it's so compressed. And the way I thought we could compress it would be through like the poll function. So yeah, it could be some questions could be, how well do you feel that DC's education system incorporates feedback from you into the decision-making process? How well do you feel the current how well do you feel you understand the current education system? When you have an educator related question or issue, how often do you feel you know where to go to address your issue? And we could even have, well, if we do a Zoom poll, logistically, I think that would mean that we would have to ask the organizers of the meeting to help us set up those questions in advance and then forward us those results. Or if we want to get a little bit more complicated in our questions, we could issue a Google form and ask participants to open it while they're on the meeting with us. But that might mean that we could ask, like, which government agencies have you interacted with in the past for an education related issue or inquiry? Select all that apply. So that hopefully once everybody answers those questions, and the reason why I think a poll is good is, like, again, it's quicker, and then two, we can better compare feedback across multiple sessions. Just comparing responses will be a little bit more easy. And then in terms of a discussion and open-ended questions, you can either decide to maybe choose a couple or one of the questions that you issued in the poll to ask people to share their thoughts on them, because how well do you feel you understand the current education system? Like, yes, you can rate it on a scale 1 to 5, but people might have thoughts that accompany that. Or you can ask something like, what's one issue or concern that you feel has taken too much time to address? You can ask, what does successful education governance look like to you? I leave that to your discretion. And then by closing, obviously thank participants for their time. Remind participants how the committee will be using feedback. Sorry, even do the dual screen thing. Okay, and then also note that there are ways to get in contact with the committee to, and there will be opportunities to further engage. And if they email you, maybe we could do the SBOE at dc.gov email, like email us so that we can email you to be further engaged in other opportunities. And then we can also provide a link to OSA's education governance roadmap, like in the chat, so that people can, on their own time, go through it to see if they have any more questions about the current education governance system. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. And yeah, that is the draft.
We went back to Hack News.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm going to open it up to see if people have other questions or feedback. Hey, Ruth. Oh, sorry. Hey, Rep Wattenberg.
You can call me Ruth. It's okay. But so what I don't fully understand is that your intention that, so we're at a meeting and for 15 minutes, they're filling out a survey, or it's like a couple of minutes filling out a survey, and then you have these open-ended questions that you're discussing.
Yeah, so I was saying that, no, it's not the full 15 minutes. It's not the full time. It's it would be, let's say you had 15 minutes, maybe 3 minutes or 2 minutes. It's like part of the warm up.
Minutes to fill it out, and then
Correct.
You're asking the questions and having a discussion.
Correct.
Okay. So I under your advisement, Representative Thompson, I am supposed to be presenting on this in a week at our Ward 3 meeting. So I've been noting what is in it. So the question I have is, and I don't know if this is where we want to do it or if we're going to have some flexibility as we present it, is like, and I don't have the questions in front of me, but do you understand our education system? I mean, I think we need to say something like, do you understand who does what? Or do you understand? I mean, things like system and governance, what are we talking about? What do we want them to respond to? Is a question. When, who do they ask education related questions to? I mean, I think it might even be worth noting like some kinds of questions, like, you know, policies about COVID or policies about the lottery. I mean, I don't know if that would work, but specifically, we're not talking about our schools, right? And maybe it would be, yeah. And who do you go to get information about who to ask? So there's that set of questions on the sort of edits, so to speak, on what we have. The other one is to sort of ask people more, you know, do you feel that kind of the system is responsive or not responsive, and ask people even what it's not responsive on. I mean, I think that's sort of what we want to know is what are the kind of, as we've talked about, the pain points, you know, where is the responsiveness low? So that we can address it. And maybe, you know, maybe it even makes sense to come up with some that are specific. We know would have residents in our own ward and see if they would have residents in other wards. Because otherwise they're so general. I guess that's part of it, is they're vague in general, and then that can be not interesting. So that's a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, I think, and I see Representative Parker. I think there's a couple things that probably are helpful, or I hope are helpful to share. One is in the longer version of this, like the fall engagement session, we have time to get into all the things. And so we're trying to fit all of that in what it looks like to do 15 or 30 minutes. One of the things Darren, Caitlin, and I discussed was, because we want to keep as many of the questions we had from the fall engagement session in this, because it's all going to be rolled up to the same batch of data and input. And if there are people who come to the session and have additional feedback, we have added on, and we haven't gotten to this yet, but we have added on the option, and we'll probably we might want to amend the slides to say, if you want to, engage more deeply in this round, that we'll host like 2 focus groups for that, which are the longer version, where people can get into all the things. But we are assuming that this version is on borrowed time, because everybody's not going to be able to come to wasn't able to come to like an hour or 2-hour session. And so I do appreciate those questions, and that's kind of part of the solution that we came up with, but it's really hard to have that full conversation if you're on 15 or 30 minutes. Now, if someone wants to say, hey, in response to your request, we'll have a special meeting or something where you can just talk about this, then we can, do what the full version looks like.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Well, you're welcome to, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, I had a similar question or flag as Representative Weidenberg, just about the questions. It totally makes sense what you're sharing, Rep. Thompson, about just wanting to keep it consistent. So 2 things. One, I do think it's worth us parsing out the system. And so like DCPS versus how people navigate OSSI, how people navigate various charters, et cetera. And then might it be worthwhile us including some follow-up questions in the survey that I would imagine we would submit after the event, just like, what did you think? Did you enjoy? And just to give us an opportunity beyond the 15, 30 minutes to get people's views. That could be a way to kind of compensate for what we were just discussing.
Yeah, I think that's helpful feedback too. I will say that, like, facilitating the longer sessions, you had time for people to do that. So like literally it was like, do you feel people are like, I don't remember the exact wording, right? But it was like, do you feel X, Y, and Z is responsive? And people literally wrote out agency by agency or office by office, and were able to post where people fit on that. So I hear that. I don't know. And we can think about, and I would welcome recommendations on how we were able to capture that in a 15, sometimes it's going to be 15, sometimes it's going to be 30-minute version. what I worry about is that it's so much, because it's such a short time frame for the engagement. I also don't want it to be just like a live polling that we're only, you know, like it's just all in the chat or all in the poll. I think the challenge is balancing how much do people talk, so you get the variety of people that are heard, because you could very easily have, let's say, 5 people give a response that's 2 minutes long, and then you're 10 minutes into your 15 minutes with one question, right? And so like, are there other tools we can use? Like, I like this idea of a follow-up survey that balance that. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
One thing I will say, I don't have a specific answer, is just maybe to limit how much, ask people for comments that are 30 seconds or 1 minute, so you don't have someone going too long. I do think at a meeting, I would feel awkward and I would be disinclined to spend a lot of time where people are looking at their devices, not talking with each other.
Yeah,
So that's all.
agreed. It kind of defeats the purpose of it being a meeting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking, another thing would be, to ask people to, to send it out to schools and ask people to, and I guess this is just a different way of saying, sort of a different way of saying and sequencing what you've been saying is, you could send a survey out to people in a school, ask them to fill it out on their own, be more specific in the questions. And then based on that, some people will find it very interesting and invite them to come to a meeting.
So the survey is actually separate. And that's so Darren put in the agenda in the chat, survey launch. We're taking the and both route.
Okay.
And so, and I should say that I don't think I said, and maybe this is an assumption in my head. So since we are doing the 2 rounds of feedback, this round of feedback is to give us a sense of like, where are the places we are focusing in? Like, what are the things that are most like top of mind, like very high level, so we can also just get some feedback on how do we get more specific in our questioning. So like, if we continue to see that, I think we had like 50 people attend the feedback sessions, and there were some trends in that, like, people didn't feel heard, or people felt like officers weren't responsive. You could kind of start to see who they felt more responded to by, and that type of thing. So we can have some initial kind of like, here's what we're hearing from people, and then do a second round of feedback. But the sense of this is to, I guess, start to frame and push us in the right direction. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's helpful. I hope that doesn't make it more confusing.
I don't know.
Okay.
I have to get off for at least 15 minutes and I'm going to try to get back.
Okay, no worries. Now that we've kind of talked through this a little bit, if it, and I would assume it would be helpful, we can share the slides with people, with you all. And that way, if you want to look at the slides and the questions, because that way you can see it, because sometimes that's helpful too, to give some written feedback. And we want to take a couple, do that between now and I would say end of day Monday. Well, not Monday, because it's Memorial Day, end of day Tuesday, just in preparation for our working session. I know that's a tight timeline, but if there are any additional, like you look at it and there's more feedback, let us know. Okay, cool. Representative Parker, your square lit up. So I want to make sure if you're trying to jump in, I don't skip you.
I was just going to say, what's the best way to provide that feedback? Like just via email or directly in on the materials via comment?
Either way is fine. Either
Okay.
way, whatever is easiest, because it could come. Like if it's easier to make a comment on the slide for that thing, or if it's easier to just send an email with some high level thoughts, whatever fits is we're open to.
Okay, cool.
All right, thank you all. I'm gonna keep us moving along because we're already at 1:30. So I'm gonna go ahead and just lean on Derek to talk about the update on our metric development. We are particularly trying to keep an eye out for what it looks like to measure equitable engagement and what our goals should be, and next steps around that. So Darren, are you ready?
Sure. And I'll just try to keep it short. I shared out 2 emails, one today and one earlier in the week, that pose a few questions. So instead of going in depth in this meeting with those questions, I'll just present the kind of frame why I need the answers to those questions, and then we could work on that offline. But I just wanted to give a quick update on the work plan regarding the community engagement survey, and then just my past discussion with the Office of Racial Equity the other week. So just quickly on the work plan, I think we're still on track for goals for this survey. I know that we wanted to do that May and June, so we're on the cusp of getting goals for that. And then 2, the survey is going out May and June. That's going to look probably more like June and July, since we're just also building in those metrics and goals, and that's not an easy task. And so this meeting, just presenting those questions, getting answers to them as soon as possible, and I'll actually do a follow-up email with a deadline for that feedback, so I could go back to the Office of Racial Equity, give them a sense of what I'm thinking, and get their feedback. And so then moving on to the Office of Racial Equity. So we met the other week. They provided a few resources around meaningful community engagement. So what it looks like, not just to create goals around sampling, but also some resources around other questions like how engaged will folks be in this process. Just a few items for like a checklist. I've shared out just something with you just to look over for that. But another item is, or resources is, just different strategies for going into the community, getting that information, and maintaining that relationship. And a lot of that is in the email from today. So just those questions that I wanted to ask, one item that they mentioned was identify who this is supposed to impact. These recommendations, the survey and all this engagement is going to lead to recommendations. Who is it most impacting? How is it impacting them? That helps with the conversation on the outreach efforts and coming up with goals. And so a few other questions that I had for you all are, when identifying which groups that we want to engage with for the survey, do we want to do it, like, for example, would communities be broken by boundaries, by wards? Or do we just want to look at something like race, ethnicity for goals? Are we doing it by ward? So for example, if we're doing an intersection between, say, Ward 1 and parents of children attending high percentages of students designated at risk, well, then that's going to be just like it's going to take a different approach, I'm going to come up with a different goal. If we're just saying we want X number of people from each ward, then that would be a different goal. So just think through what you would want, like if you want an intersection of demographics as the goal, what would those be? As far as I know, talking to Office of Racial Equity, perhaps doing it just by race, but also taking an oversampling approach for just historically marginalized communities and just approaching it that way. So we'll have a target number, but then maybe going over the populations and communities, going over a higher percentage for different communities. And so in this meeting, maybe just thinking about that question might be really helpful. But other questions that I had were like listing out the community organizations, getting this out, like sharing this out with them and with across the district, and who will be reaching out to communities across the wards. Would it be just a committee, full board, and so on? I think that might be something that could be answered online, but the main, if we could discuss one thing, it would be just what are the demographics we're aiming for in the goals? Is it by families attending schools with high percentages of students or schools based on at-risk levels? Would it be by school levels, elementary school, middle school, high school? If you all can give some feedback on that, that would be very helpful. And other than that, I don't have anything else really to share. Just one last thing is just sharing. They also share, Office of Racial Equity shared a few resources on tips for increasing neighborhood response rates. So when the survey goes out, having families share it out with other families, maybe creating competitions among members within their wards. But one thing that really stood out was building blitzes for specific target populations. And so identifying like who's most impacted by these recommendations and planning out just a major blitz to get it out. So for example, Alistair talking about going to laundromats, whatever it is, whatever those strategies are, building that into the survey, the project plan to get these surveys out. And then lastly, something I also wanted to note was immediately sharing results with community, the community that provided their feedback, if there's a way to do that, so that in future surveys, they would be more likely to participate in other surveys. So those are just a few highlights that I want to share with you all. So just the next steps would be for me to draft, pilot a survey, propose the methodology for getting the survey out and analyzing it, share the sampling goals with the Office of Racial Equity, and then work with staff to get out QR codes, social media, anything like that. So that's where we're at with the survey. And I just wanted to open it up for any questions you might have.
Questions or comments, reactions?
It's less a question and more a comment. One, thanks, Darren, for that. I think the easier metrics to focus on obviously would be ward and school designation. I think given that we have almost a 50-50 split in DCPS and charters, that's low-hanging fruit for us to try to identify. I think what would be important though, beyond just ward, is income level. That's a bit trickier to grasp, and obviously we can ask that, but that's also an intrusive type question. And so somehow if we can figure that out, because for instance, a place like Ward 5, yeah, we can get people there, but we will want to make sure that we're amplifying or at least balancing the voices of families most vulnerable with our school system. So just throwing that out there.
It's a great question. And perhaps that would be where Office of Racial Equity can come in. They're working with other agencies, and other agencies do outreach as well. So a follow-up question for them would be, if we can capture, if we're building into the goal, income levels or socioeconomic status, how do we do that? Like, what would that look like? How do we do that?
Yeah, or more so, how do you ID? What's the most efficient ways to ID that for participants?
Absolutely. So just a quick question. When it comes to writing these goals, I wouldn't go over two intersections. So Ward and X, if we want to do it by, I mean, Ward just makes sense to me. But I think it shouldn't go beyond more than one demographic. So I would lean more, I would suggest leaning more towards school and at-risk population. I think that also ties into the communication aspect of this. I know we're going into summer and schools are closed, but just that might be the easiest approach to it. But I can ask Office of Racial Equity about that.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, honestly, in any other year, I would say, yeah, schools are closed, but this year, schools really aren't that closed. Like we are going to have a much larger cross section of schools that are open and running programming than any other year, just because we're trying to catch kids up from the pandemic. So yeah, so it's not full schools, but schools are going to be busy places this summer in a way that they usually aren't. I do think income is hard to ask. I mean, I've asked it in some surveys, and like in ranges, not the actual income, but like in ranges. And sometimes people will fill that out, and most times people fill it out. But maybe we do just target schools with larger Title I populations. At risk, I worry about at risk just because the framing of at risk is like those 4 categories. And I want to, I want to make sure that what we care about is the same thing as that definition of at risk. And if it's not, then maybe it's a different frame we're using. I see, I know Darren's probably going to respond, and I see Rep. Patterson trying to jump in.
Can I quickly respond to that? Perhaps using 20, I mean, I'm just throwing this out there, so maybe this is something I could rethink, but using 2019 star rating data and just say, okay, like lowest star schools and like oversampling lower star schools, since that is just so entangled with student populations. I don't know, it's just like a methodology approach, but maybe something to consider. Again, it's something I could raise with Office of Racial Equity.
I don't know if I want to, I think those things tend to have been correlated. I don't know if I want to go the star route, because especially because the board has raised so many obvious challenges with the labeling and the stars. Yeah. I do think maybe the Title I designation, and that gets tricky too, because, you know, once we get over a certain population in DC, everybody's Title I. But we can find that information. So maybe just oversampling at some of the Title I schools might be a way to get to income. I also don't, I don't necessarily want race to be lost. I'm going to stop talking though, because Representative Patterson has his hand up.
And I was going to say basically the same thing. I know, Darren, you're the expert at this when it comes to gathering data. I give you all your props on that. And I was just trying to say that the narrative seems to be going toward, you know, what's the percentage of at-risk students do you have at your school? Is your school a Title I? You know, either one, which one ever, you know, is best to do it. But that seems to be where the conversations tend to be leaning toward or moving toward, even as we look at the legislation that Mendelson put forth. is basically looking at, percentage of at risk and all that kind of stuff. So just saying that where it seems all the conversation is headed.
Okay. Other thoughts or feedback? Do people have questions about what questions we're asking? And or would it be helpful? I mean, because I will say it's all the same round of feedback. So it's going to be similar types of questions to the fall engagement session and the shorter 15-minute version, because we want to capture as much feedback about those ideas as possible.
This isn't about the questions, but just wanting to say, I think establishing a metric for engagement is a great idea and could be something we standardize across the board and committees. Yeah, and it would be, I think, would be a way to implement the equity framework or apply it. And I know we've been looking for different ways. So just kudos there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's part of our hope. In when we've been having this conversation, we have looked at and relied on what has past work of the board looked like. Clearly, we're not starting from zero, right? Because there has been good work done. And one of the things that, at least for me, kept coming up was like, what's enough engagement? When do we stop? Who have we heard from? Who we need to hear from? And so we thought it was a good time to take a stab at, trying to build that in up front so we can do some learning. All right, last call for thoughts around the metric conversation. With the reminder that Darren is going to follow up with another email. If you haven't read his other 2 emails from this week already, I know one came today, so nobody's a slacker. Okay, hearing none. We're at 1:48. I'm going to move us right along. Survey launch. So we kind of started to get into that. We are, now that we've gotten through all of the budget conversations, we do have our allocation to be able to go ahead and launch a survey, which will complement these efforts. That will be part of this metric conversation. Darren has already started working on what questions are we asking. And of course, part of that is, again, with like the metrics we're overlaying, what questions around demographics we need to be capturing in that survey. We were thinking that it would run mostly during the month of June. I think we want feedback around just like, and Darren, correct me if I'm missing anything. We want feedback around like, of course, like, does that sound right? Is the amount of time to keep it open? We already talked about like the metrics. Are there places, organizations, things that should be on our radar as far as going to or reaching out to make sure they have it? And Darren, is that it? Tell me if my mind is playing tricks on me.
I think that's another thing we touched on was offering like a focus group for or something like that, but also like maybe like a Spanish translation of the survey, but also maybe like a Spanish like inviting like a focus group for Spanish speakers when it comes to education governance, and especially the overarching questions of how do you experience, navigate, and interact with DC's education system, and how would you improve that education system? I think we were touching on how important that feedback would be from like hearing straight from Spanish speaking individuals.
That's right. Yes. Thank you, Darren. And we started to mention this earlier. So because the survey is an opportunity to reach out to people, but of course, surveys are, you do it quickly. And B, the engagement sessions, this version of the engagement sessions is shorter. We talked about the idea, and it actually gets at some of what Representative Rottenberg was talking about. Should we schedule in, I think we were talking about maybe July, and I know July sounds like a terrible time, but everybody's not going to be gone, and they would be virtual. Maybe in July, holding possibly two, maybe three. I feel like three is a little too ambitious, but two larger focus groups that are a virtual version of the fall engagement session, with one of those being one we can direct Spanish speakers to. We could put both at the end of the slides for the short engagements and at the end of the survey. If you want to, have this longer, more in-depth experience, then you could just sign up for the focus group as well. What do people think about that idea? And that would be facilitated, I guess, somewhere between myself and the staff, and if members of this committee would like to participate in that. But it would be a longer, like a final offering of longer sessions before we submit our recommendations.
Struggling to come off mute, but I think that's a great idea. And we should definitely do it. I'm not sold on July. I do think that might just dampen turnout, but I still think we should do it. And if that's the only time, then so be it. I was also just thinking, I'm not sure if Representative Lopez is Spanish speaking. I think I've heard her talk about she does speak Spanish. And so that could also just be an opportunity to include her and empower her to be a part of that as well, for that session in particular.
Okay, thanks for that. And I will ask Representative Lopez if this is something, her comfort level, and if it's something she'd be interested in. Representative Patterson, anything?
Ma'am.
All right. Well, hearing none. These were some meaty chunks. So thank you for bearing with us on this magical Friday before a long weekend. The last agenda item, which I'm fully sure we can take care of in these 7 minutes, is one that came at the request of the leadership, which was just making sure we know the posture everyone would prefer to remain in with regard to committee meetings. So we can totally stay online for committee meetings. We can entertain the idea of some hybrid, not hybrid as in at one time, because that seems to be a mess. I'm gonna be honest with you. But just different options for different things. So like if we had I don't know, really important panel, maybe that's something we would want to convene in person. But overall, just wanted to get a sense of the committee, from the committee, as far as the posture they wanted to remain in. Now I'm going to say Kimba's vote's going to be for virtual, because you already know he does not like me leaving the house. And these meetings do happen in the middle of the day. And so I want to be mindful of the fact that you have the committee time you're dedicating, and then you have whatever transit time that it will require for us to be in person. So that's my preference, but I wanted to ask for others. I see Representative Patterson quickly put virtual in the chat.
Exactly. And we said all the same things during the accountability and assessments meetings, that, it would just be almost impossible to transit across somewhere, especially since most of us have jobs. And these meetings are in the middle of the day. So we had preferred to do the same thing unless it was something, as you stated, like a special meeting or panel that we felt that it would be better served to have it in person. We would like to stay.
Okay. Representative Parker, any thoughts?
Yep, that makes total sense. Virtual.
Cool beans. So like I said, I figured we'd take care of that one pretty quickly. We do have some homework and some follow-up items. I did want to clarify. So when Caitlin was presenting, she said that 2 committee members have to be present, but it's not 2 committee members. So like, let's say I was not on this committee. If I'm going to a Ward 7 Ed Council meeting to present out, I would reach out to see if a second board member can go with me, ideally a member from the committee, just to kind of, so we can hear the different things. But it's kind of hard to take notes, facilitate, and have a fuller impression of what everybody said back to you at the same time. And so we're going to do our best to keep track of like when people are going places so that there can be someone on second. I don't think that would be, I think it's going to be a lot, but I don't think it's going to be terribly hard to do because most meetings are still in a virtual posture. And so members could pop in for 15 or 30 minutes and pop out. So I did want to clarify that. We do have some follow-up homework. So look out for emails from Darren and I. And if there's nothing else, is there anything else? Okay. With there being nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn us and thank you for your time.
Enjoy y'all's Memorial Day weekends, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Well.